That is the blues. Hello, friends and curiosifers. It is much to my great pleasure to see that blues culture and blues music is on the rise again. In part thanks to this wonderful film, Sinners, which is a mix of sort of hoodoo culture, story about the Great Migration in the Mississippi and the connection to Chicago, but also mixed with vampire attacks. I found this film incredibly satisfying and enjoyable. To each his own. It may not be your taste, but it has some amazing music in it, and the musical direction is great, the performances are fantastic, and it's getting people who don't know that much about blues culture to look at this incredible wealth that America produced, coming out of the African American experience and developing from, first in Africa to fields of the Americas, and then up into the urban centers like Chicago and on in to create rock and roll. And it's an amazing story. What I want to talk about today, though, is sort of the idea of blues culture, particularly hoodoo, and in particular, the deal with the devil. As many of you know, this is an old Faustian story that goes back to the Renaissance and earlier. You can get special skills or special knowledge if you just sell your soul to the devil. And of course, one of the latest and greatest incarnations of this story is Robert Johnson at the crossroads in Mississippi. Now, I actually went on a bit of a pilgrimage, this was years ago, in which I went from Chicago, sort of tracing the Great Migration backwards from Chicago down to Mississippi and eventually down to Louisiana, and had myself created a little Mojo bag, which is a good luck charm that's sort of loaded with all this amazing hoodoo culture. I will remind you of the great Muddy Waters song, "I'm going down to Louisiana, get me a Mojo hand." And then he says, "I'm going down to Louisiana, get me a Mojo hand, gonna have all you women right here at my command." All right, if I could get that kind of power, I think a trip down to Louisiana through the Delta would be worth it. It didn't exactly work out for me, but that's neither here nor there. What I want to do is tell you this story about what a mojo is, who Robert Johnson is, and the tension between selling yourself and finding yourself in your music or your art. And we have this wonderful long tradition of the archetype of the kind of Faustian character, and it really does apply to you and me as well. In our paltry little lives, there's this question of, will I have integrity when I make a decision? Will I have authenticity, or will I sell out? It's a question that many of us have to deal with. Okay, welcome to Professor Asma's Guide to Unusual Knowledge. The question of authenticity is really interesting because I grew up playing blues music in Chicago. I was very fortunate to be in the house band at Buddy Guy's Legends in Chicago. This is the original Legends back in the 90s, and played with Buddy Guy many times. You'll notice that Buddy Guy makes a great cameo in this movie, Sinners, at the end. I'm not going to spoil it, but amazing, wonderful. And so I played on the scene in Chicago, and I played with many great blues players. I was very fortunate. Bo Diddley, Lonnie Brooks, Junior Wells, Coco Taylor. And what I noticed about Chicago blues was, since I spent so much time in these nightclubs, is that it was pretty hardcore. Like, you could see somebody get up, and yeah, there's tourism, and there's tourists there. People have come all the way from Japan to see some of these great blues artists in Chicago. But also, the really good blues artists would sort of mix in sort of the kind of tourism shtick they needed to do to kind of put on a show, but then every once in a while you would see them pour their heart out on the stage. I remember seeing Otis Rush and I've seen Buddy do this too, just all of a sudden, they're not representing pain like as a kind of mimic of pain for a show. Sometimes you got to do that because you're a performer. But every once in a while, you actually see them going through pain on the stage. And so there's this amazing difference between representing pain and catharsis and actually experiencing it and expressing it for the audience. And if you see a lot of blues music or you're a big fan of blues music, you can see the difference. It happens and suddenly you're in it too. And it kind of creates an aura in the room. I'm not sort of saying it's like deeply mystical, but it's something weird and something sort of magical. And it happens in other art forms too. You'll see this in other folk music traditions, and you'll see it in theater, where all of a sudden the artist is channeling the emotion rather than just sort of mimicking it. And that's something that I think is at the heart of the Faustian deal with the devil story. Because if you look at Robert Johnson, let's think about his life for a moment. He starts out as a sharecropper in Mississippi, just like everybody else in the 1920s. And he's like, this sucks. I'm not doing this. And he basically learns to play the guitar and sing songs. But he's fairly middling. He's kind of mediocre. Nobody's paying that much attention to him in the areas where he's playing. Then he disappears for a while. And he goes out of town, and he comes back like a year or two later, and he is phenomenally good. He's like strangely, like just supernaturally good on the guitar and vocals, and people start to sort of gather around him and find what juke joint is he playing at, because let's go there. And so he's become this little phenomenon in the Mississippi Delta. When he returns, and he's so talented and skilled, he's got songs like Me and the Devil, Crossroads, Hellhound on My Trail, and a legend starts to emerge that what happened when he was gone was he made a deal with the devil at the crossroads in order to become famous and to become so skillful, and he basically sold his soul. And that followed him around, and he basically nursed that legend himself, and he sort of used it and played on it to his advantage. Robert Johnson basically becomes kind of the patron saint of all things blues. You've got sort of the drinking and the gambling, you've got the heartache, you've also got the strutting and the sort of pride that you hear, for example, like if you listen to hip hop lyrics, you'll hear this incredible boasting going on, like I'm the greatest of all time, everybody bow to me, I'm amazing. That's classic. It comes out of blues tradition, and it probably goes back to the ancient world for all we know, but it's the kind of prideful boasting that happens oftentimes in his lyrics. And then the rambling, like you've got to basically not stay put, but move all around. You're traveling, you're basically on the road. No woman and no family is going to pin you down, and no job is going to pin you down. You're always going to be on the move. And then finally, all the sort of lyrics and the sort of emotional outpouring of regret, because it's not all just drinking and having fun. It's also deep regrets, broken relationships, heartache, tragedy. It's very common in blues music. So Johnson sort of crystallizes all of this. And what happens is he dies very young at age 27. So what happens is he's basically performing at this juke joint called the Three Forks. And I was lucky enough when I went down to Mississippi to see the sign for this juke joint called the Three Forks. And it's at a wonderful museum called the Mississippi Delta Blues Museum, which I highly recommend you go to. And so he's at the Three Forks, and he basically performs. And after that, like late that night, the next day, he's very, very sick, and he's dead the next day. Some theories suggested that he was basically hitting on the wrong woman, and possibly the husband may have poisoned him. That's one theory. And of course, the mythological view is that the devil had finally come to take what was his. There's all kinds of riffs like this. It's become an archetype. Not only do you see it in the medieval story of Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, but then the great German writer Goethe creates two novels about Faust, Faust I and Faust II, and then there's another version of it by Thomas Mann, and then you get the Charlie Daniels Band doing, The Devil Went Down to Georgia. It's a common theme. So when I went down to Mississippi, I basically had a list of all these little towns that Robert Johnson mentions in his song lyrics. And so I went to each of these, and I basically collected sort of mud or dirt from the areas, and also cotton and any other little sort of bits of the natural world I could find from all these towns. And I collected them together. Then I took them down to Louisiana, and I built a little Mojo hand or a Mojo bag, which is a kind of satin or leather satchel, quite small, something you can fit in your pocket. And you have basically magical implements of hoodoo in that to give you power. One of the things I found when I was down there was an amazing voodoo shop. I don't know if it's still there. This was pre-Katrina. But in there was all these wonderful implements that you could buy. For example, there were these little alligator heads. Somebody had killed alligators and basically like dried them out and shellacked their heads. And it said, there was like was a box of them, and you could buy one and keep it, and it was for warding off evil in-laws. So if your mother-in-law is giving you trouble, your father-in-law is giving you trouble, you get one of these shellacked alligator heads, and basically it's going to help you. And so there were all these sort of implements. One was for how to get rich. So there was a little scarab beetle that had been carved out of stone, which I got to put in my Mojo. And that's supposed to help you with wealth. There was one to help you with romance. And naturally I picked that up as well. I'm sorry to say that I eventually over the years lost my Mojo, which is literally true, but also metaphorically. Maybe that explains my downward spiral. Anyway, that's another story. Point is, I was going to all the towns that Robert Johnson mentioned, including Rosedale, Greenville, and Robinsonville. And then also I spent some time in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and went to some juke joints, tried to sort of absorb the local blues scene, eat the food. And when I was at the Delta Blues Museum in Clarksdale, one of the employees or the docents there advised me of where they thought the crossroads actually was, where Robert Johnson made the deal with the devil. Now, no one really knows, and of course it's a legend, so it's not like I believe this actually happened, but the crossroads is said to be Highway 49 and Highway 61. And that's the place where I went to pay my respects to Robert Johnson. Luckily, there was a little juke joint there called Abe's that had the most amazing barbecue. Basically, I could see the crossroads from this place, Abe's, where I ate this insanely good barbecue and drank a bunch of beer, and it was fantastic. But what does it all mean? If you think about the deal with the devil from Faust, what's happening there is Faust basically wants wisdom. And so Mephistopheles, which is kind of either the devil's henchman or Satan himself, depending on your interpretation, comes and basically gives him this deal. I will give you wisdom, and you will be able to understand alchemy and change metal to gold, and you will be able to get the love of your life, and you will have great parties and fun, and you have to sell your soul. So Faust does it, and it's kind of tragic because Faust is strangely likable. Even though he's made a deal with the devil and he's kind of absurd, he's still not really a bad person. He's just like you and me on a bad day. He was desperate. He wanted to learn things. It wasn't like he just wanted to rape, pillage, and burn. He ends up getting more and more depraved the more power he has, and that's kind of a central idea. But one of the things I really like about the Robert Johnson myth is Robert Johnson never does really become famous. Of course, he gets a good reputation around town, and he plays these little juke joints, but they're tiny little clubs. When he finally cuts a record, he goes to Texas and basically records a bunch of music, and we still have that music. It's 20-some wonderful songs like Sweet Home Chicago and Crossroads, and many of you have heard those tunes. Honestly, they created the songbook for early rock and roll and blues rock, from Eric Clapton doing Crossroads and Cream to all those Led Zeppelin songs. But he himself never became famous in the way that someone like Muddy Waters became famous. And that's because music aficionados up in, like, say, Chicago or urban centers, once they heard these songs by Robert Johnson, they went down and tried to find him. And when they went down there, he was already dead. So instead, they found some other great blues artists down there, including Muddy Waters. And Muddy Waters comes up to Chicago. He basically creates urban blues. So it's not the case that Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil and then became really famous. All that happened was Robert Johnson became really good at blues music. And so there's something sort of, selling your soul to the devil to become excellent at something is strangely beautiful. It's not the same as selling your soul to get money or just sex or whatever. There's something else sort of magical about this. And that's the thing, that I think always intrigues me about the Robert Johnson story. It's that there was something supernatural that happened, where this guy who basically was mediocre comes back as an excellent musician and singer. And that, I think, indicates metaphorically what it's like to give your life to something like music or art. You have to, in a sense, do these incredible sacrifices. Now, you say you're sacrificing your soul, and I'm not saying that's real literally, but you are sacrificing things to become great at music or art. You sacrifice a lot of happiness. It's hard for you to basically sustain relationships and have a family. And you see this in blues men. in the tradition of blues culture, but you also see it in every other art form. Many of us want to have the talent of Van Gogh, as a painter, but you don't want to be Van Gogh. Somebody who suffers that much and is that alienated, it's a kind of archetype in our culture, which is the truly great artist is also not fit for happiness or family life. And that is sort of in play here too, I think, in the archetype of Robert Johnson. And the romantic movement of the 19th century, people like Goethe, who wrote Faust, really understood this and sort of appreciated this idea that passion is something that is amazing and beautiful, and we all want to have it and we all appreciate it when we see it, but it undoes you. It kind of ruins you for the kind of mainstream life that most of the rest of us have. And so that tension is even in Faust. So for example, at the end of Faust, I think it's Faust 2, Goethe has followed our main character through all these adventures, many of them silly. And it's at the end where basically where the devil has come to claim Faust's soul. But there's this moment of redemption in which Goethe has this sort of choir of angels say the following, quote,
"Whoever strives in ceaseless toil, him we may grant redemption."
Even though somebody sacrifices themselves and basically destroys their ability to have a kind of mainstream life, nonetheless, there's something beautiful about it, and it's redemptive because they end up expressing aspects of the human condition that the average person can't do. And that's contained within this Robert Johnson myth as well. I loved my Mojo bag when I had it and carried it with me. Oftentimes I would play gigs and have it in my pocket. And I kind of only quasi-believed that it helped me. And even Muddy Waters, when they asked him, there's an interesting book called Deep Blues by a writer named Robert Palmer who interviewed Muddy Waters and asked him about his sort of references to supernatural culture. Because blues music has all this hoodoo in it. And they asked him, do you believe in the Mojo? And Muddy Waters said, well, superstitious people believe in that. I'm not really superstitious, but, it doesn't hurt. And that's sort of my position too. Ultimately, I think the idea of a magical solution feels like, to me, like a quick fix. And so in that sense, I don't think it's helpful. The reason why Robert Johnson became a great guitar player is not because he had a quick fix, deal with the devil or a mojo, but because he probably practiced his ass off. And he mastered the fingerstyle techniques and the vocals and the timing and he's an amazing player. That took work. That took hours, and that took the 10,000 hours to master something that we hear about so often. So there is no quick fix for talent and skill like this. And that's why I think the magic stuff is just a metaphor. Hoodoo culture, sometimes called sort of root work, is a wonderful collection of images, icons, magical practices. It sometimes gets confused together with voodoo. And there's reason for that, because there's shared symbolism and some shared practices. But voodoo really is an African religion, which then became very widespread in the Caribbean when slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas and the Caribbean. And it also then evolved, and you can see it in places like New Orleans and in Southern culture. Hoodoo is related to that, but it doesn't have sort of an official theology of gods and spirits. It sort of embraces ideas of the trickster, which are frequently really from African religion too. Ideas about a divinity that's both good, but also bad and mischievous, which is, I think, a wonderful theology that is sort of missing in mainstream, I think, Western monotheism. But I think this blend of stuff is really fascinating, and it really fills blues culture. What happened was, if you lived through slavery, you ended up as a sharecropper. The next generation was living with sharecropping in Mississippi and in the South generally, and they were dealing with Jim Crow laws. And so it was very oppressive for African Americans in this part of the world, and so there was a great migration north, up to Chicago. And that represented jobs, and that represented opportunity. Rich urban culture that then slowly changed. So you went from acoustic guitars to electrification. And I remember Buddy Guy saying, that even though he learned on an acoustic, when you get in these bigger nightclubs and people are dancing, you have to cut through. So you have to start playing electric instruments. And that really changed blues music. And eventually, as Muddy Waters said, the blues had a baby and they named it rock and roll. So, all right, that's just a little bit of blues culture for you. I hope you enjoyed it. Now get out there and start listening to more Robert Johnson and blues music and investigating blues culture. And I'll see you back here next time. Always stay curious.